Last time, we left you with a cliffhanger. What was going to happen? How is that 16th note going to be played going into the vivace of the first movement of Beethoven's Seventh Symphony? Let's think of the couple options we have. And then we're going to see how we can conduct it. If the tempo, and I'm just picking one at random here, has been 1, 2, 3, 4. And if we stick to the idea that that 16th note has been consistent throughout, the flute and the oboe would have bum, 2, ya ta 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 ta, bum bum ba-dum bum ba-dum bum ba-dum bum ba-dum ba, like that. But, and Beethoven really didn't quite have the technical tool at his disposal to indicate it this way, it is possible for this to happen. Dum, da-dum, bum bum ba-dum bum ba-dum bum, to have that opening note be in the new tempo. It's a decision all of you have to struggle with. And you have to be able to explain why you came to that particular decision. My own feeling, personally, is that this is part of the new tempo. And the why has to do with the first symphony. In the same place, structurally, the first symphony has a similar passage where the strings are playing slowly, and then there are 4/16ths that lead to an allegro. And the question is, are those 4/16ths played in the allegro tempo, or are they played in the tempo we've been playing in the past? The argument to me is that in the first symphony, when we come to the repeated section, just before we make the repeat, Beethoven has those same 4 notes, and they're played quickly because there's no indication of a tempo change. So I apply that same principle here to what I do. Vivace, almost the fastest tempo we can have. I guess molto vivace, probably the fastest. And we have many, many decisions to make as conductors. I'll try to point a couple of them out to you as we go along here, and I'm not going to go bar by bar because much of what applies here is going to have the same impact throughout the work. But one thing is constant. You're going to see a lot of dum pa-dum pam pa-dum pam pa-dum pam pa-dum pam, to the point where you really get tired of it. But that rhythm is crucial to this particular piece. And that rhythm is written in different ways. So let's look and see at the vivace what it simply says. There's no dots. There's no rests. Could be a little more on the legato side. Certainly possible. And then, when we go on page 7, and we get to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, the 8th bar, and even before, all of a sudden dots start to appear. Dum pa pam pa pa pam. It's the same rhythm, dum pa pam pa, but there was no dot the first time, and now that it has perhaps more melodic significance, there's a dot there. And yet there's a third way that this rhythm appears, and for that, all we have to do is look at the 4 bars that occur before the fermata at the bottom of the page. Same rhythm, dum, pa-dum, pum, pa-dum, pum, pa-dum, pa. But now there's a rest after the first note. 3 different notations of the same rhythm. Do we play them in a different way depending on what we see on the page? And as you go through the score, you're going to find inconsistencies. You're going to find places where it doesn't make sense the way he wrote it. Do we play it that way? You're going to find places where you say, well, okay, I know what he's trying for, but I don't think that's going to work. Do you have the right to make a change from what is written? This applies to every musician, of course. And the short answer is, yes, you do. For two reasons. One, it's possible that Beethoven didn't really pay attention and didn't write all the time exactly what he meant, assuming that the players and musicians would figure it out. And the second reason is your own musical tastes and preferences, ones that help you develop consistency between how you think the music sounds and what the audience hears. Clarity of texture is important. Most of this movement is fairly straightforward for conductors. You're mostly in two, mostly. But every so often there's a little curve thrown in by Beethoven that gives you hopefully something you've learned in the past from me. And I'll show you one of them. It's on the bottom score of page 7, and you see there is a fermata, which is followed by a scale passage in the strings. So how do we do this? First decision, should there be a rest between the fermata and the scale? Meaning, do we do it ba, or do we do it ba, most conductors tend to favor the latter, as do I, just to clear the sound. But there are two ways to interpret that. That means there are two different ways to conduct. So let me show you. If you choose to do it with the rest, you give your fermata, you give a cutoff, cutoff with the left hand, your right hand doesn't move, and you're ready to give the upbeat. Fermata, off, like that. If, on the other hand, you choose to go da, it's this. Fermata, there's no other way out of that. It's hard. And in some degrees, it's unnatural. But it can be done. Once more. Like that. You kind of need both hands so everybody knows what you're doing, and you probably have to explain it if you do it in this particular way. But that is a real problem, a real technical problem to be solved, and one which you want to watch yourself in the mirror many times, imagining that you're a string player having to do this part. What's going to be the clearest for you? Remember earlier in that first part where we saw the word dolce? And we talked a little bit about what it meant and what we tell the orchestra. Here's another one. It's before letter D. 1, 2, 3, 4 bars. And it's in the woodwinds and in the horns. After all this yum param pam param pam param pa, Beethoven now writes the word dolce. What does he mean? I think it's yum param pam param pam pam param pam param pam param pam, with legato, with no separation at all. But then, when we get to letter D itself, there's no word. Do we go back to being yum param pam param pam param pa, or do we ask people to play it long? Another decision to make. Could be done either way. Absolutely no reason why not. Beethoven doesn't give us quite as much information as we would like to have. And that gives you the chance to at least have a reason to play it whatever way you want, as long as you can say why you were doing that way. And your why of playing it long here is because he didn't negate his dolce from before. Now we come to an easy decision. Well, maybe not that easy. Page 13. Middle of the upper score. Big line after 2 measures rest. and a repeat sign. To go back or not to go back? That is the question. Repeats are something that musicians discuss quite often. It's the fashion nowadays to play the repeats. But you have to remember that a repeat is a function of formal design. The symphonic structure said you take what's called the exposition, that's the presentation of the themes, and you play them again. In a letter from Brahms to Dvorak, Brahms indicates that in the Second Symphony that Brahms wrote, Dvorak, who's about to conduct the piece in Prague, does not need to take this repeat because, as Brahms says, audiences now know this piece very well. They do not need to hear the material a second time because they know the motives which are going to appear in what is called the development, the next section of the piece. Repeats become a matter of personal taste. For a long time, repeats like this simply weren't observed. These days, I would say it's split about 50-50. Up to you to decide. Here's a conductorial trick for you. How do you let the orchestra know if you haven't said anything at the beginning? When you get to the 4 bars before this repeat sign, jump, 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 dum, jump, jump. You're showing them, and you can do it this way, that you want them to go on. If you want them to do the repeat, you do that. You can also, since you have 2 bars rest, tell them repeat. And then there's a scramble to turn the pages back, and it usually winds up being a bit of a mess. So the more information you give in advance, the better. There aren't too many technical tricks for the majority of the rest of the first movement. But there are 2 places that I wanted to point out to you where the conductor has a little bit more say in things than you might imagine. Let's look at the first one. On page 14 of my score, you see there's a letter F. And after letter F, in the 5th bar, we see the winds playing our favorite rhythm now, yum taram pam param pam param pam param. But we also see that the second violins are playing yum da 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 dum pa da 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 dum underneath that. Seems harmless enough. Actually kind of interesting. We like that. But let's look forward just a little bit. On page 15, before letter G, 6 bars. There's your winds again, playing yum param pam param pam param pam para. Oh, the second violins aren't doing their yum da 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 dum pa da da da. Why not? It's exactly the same thing. It's an imitative passage. Can we add that using the downbeat notes and repeating them? It's probably a bit of a stretch. I do it, just to give consistency to how it is the first time. Most people don't. But I think it's just one of those cases again where Beethoven might have not thought about it, might have left it out, perhaps because it was different. But it is a place where arguably you can make an alteration to the score based on a piece of information that you have. How do you get that information to the members of the orchestra? Either you have the librarian put it in, or when you arrive at this place, you tell the second violins, please play your E and G sharp the same way you played your F and G 4 bars earlier. Some people will be, oh, how dare he change that? And other people will go, that's really interesting. I like that. So, what's the other place you need to know about? On page 21, we have our good friend, the fermata, once again. Except this time there are two of them. And the rhythm going in is tricky. I'll try to sing it for you. Yum param pam param pam param pam param pam pa. And then oboe. There are lots of ways to do this. And singing them, even if you have a bad voice, as do I, can help you to discover which way you want to do it. Technically, there are a couple ways that this can occur. The fermata is on the note, not on the rests. So the literal way would be yum param pam param pam param pam param pa ta da like that. It's very awkward. It doesn't give the oboe much time to get a breath and be able to play the long phrase that's coming. So the more logical thing is yum param pam param pam param pam param pa off pa pa off and give the oboe a little bit of time perhaps to play the phrase. And in that same vein, something that, unless it's an orchestra that knows this piece very well, you will notice that on the second fermata there's a pizzicato. It's important that you tell the strings that winds have a 16th note upbeat. If they don't know that, they're probably going to play early with the first note of the winds. That's something, as a conductor, you must always be aware of when you're studying. And it's also why I encourage all of you who might be considering pursuing this career, not only to study the score, but to actually look at the individual parts, not the parts from the score. I mean the flute part, the first violin part. Look and see what it is that the players have in front of them. What are they missing? What do they need to know? After all, there's nothing in there to tell the players, unless somebody's written it in before, that our woodwinds have a note before the pits. You do save a lot of time, and it helps clarify something that is important. Now we come to the end of the first movement, and with the third bar on the lower part of the score. There's our rhythm again, yum param pam param pam param pam param pa, in the low strings, also given by the winds. And now we have a sort of new figure based on what happened before. Da yaram pa yaram, back and forth. This is a long build, and Beethoven is smart. He writes sempre pianissimo, so your beat needs to be nice and small, really conveying that pianissimo. Our crescendo doesn't start until measure 409, which is about 10 bars or so after letter N. And sometimes he even writes poco crescendo, just a little bit. And why is that? It's because the climax of this crescendo is not until the 6th bar on page 28. So we have a long way to go to make this crescendo. Your job when you conduct is to make sure that the orchestra saves as much as possible for the big final build-up. And when you reach the fortissimo, that is the loudest moment, and not any point before. You have to get to that point. Remember that very early exercise we had with left-hand independence, where you're conducting something, and you gradually make the crescendo? Here's the place to use it. Exactly here. It wasn't just an exercise after all. It was based on a real piece of music, and it happens in many, many cases. And finally, those last 3 bars. It's a quarter note. It doesn't have a dot on it. Do we try to reference these notes as being something similar to the very first notes in the symphony? Are they that same length? Are they shorter? Longer? It really depends on how you perceive this. For me, I think it should be very similar to how we played those opening notes. Same energy, same breadth of nobility, giving it a more open feeling of sound rather than a harsh one. These have just been a few points about the Seventh Beethoven Symphony, first movement. You can go bar by bar, and you will always find something new and different. At no point does any conductor open the score and say, I know that. You can't. And every time you conduct it, the orchestra is going to be different. Might be a different violinist playing in an orchestra you've conducted for years. Could be an orchestra you've never seen before. Could be an orchestra that's never played this piece. So there is no way that a work, a masterpiece such as this, is ever anything less than new. We'll continue our exploration of this symphony, perhaps not in quite that detail, but I just want to point out as we go along that there are problems to be solved. We've addressed many of them in these first couple of episodes about this piece, but there's a long way to go. Your job, and I don't mind, put on a couple recordings, conduct along, but put on ones that are different so you don't get locked into somebody else's interpretation. But try to learn the piece first. Try to see what you can get from what Beethoven is telling you. It's a conversation that never ends.